Sean Finnegan, and you are listening to Restitutio, a podcast that seeks to recover authentic Christianity and live it out today. Have you heard of historiography? Your historiography is the method you employ in doing history. It's like a collection of presuppositions and commitments to how you think history should be done. Now, this is especially relevant when the scholars who make the rules for doing history decide to exclude any supernatural events from their historiography. Today, my guest, Aaron Shelenberger, continues his rebuttal to Ehrman's three main objections to the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus. We discuss Ehrman's contentions that supernatural events are inaccessible to historians and the prevalence of methodological naturalism. Also, Shelenberger briefly reviews the recent debate between his old professor Mike Licona and Bart Ehrman. Here now is episode 446, Resurrection, Objection, Part 3, final part, Supernatural, Inaccessible, ? With Aaron Shelenberger. Aaron Shelenberger, welcome back to Restitutio. So glad to have you on the show today to talk about resurrection.
Hello again, Sean. Thanks for having me again.
You mentioned from last time there might be some clarifications, some review. What would you like to go back to from last time, our last conversation together, before we get into today's topic?
Yeah, there's one thing that I've neglected to point out in our previous meeting regarding Ehrman's objection. As I've explained, his objection was the intrinsic improbability of miracles, because historians can only establish what probably happened in the past. Miracles are extremely improbable, therefore historians cannot establish miracles. While Ehrman's objection fails because of the invalidity and the unsoundness of the argument, the resurrection that we have in this case is a non-supernatural resurrection, which can be reduced to a natural resurrection. Now, why is this? Because in my response, I've granted that we put aside whether or not God is involved in the picture. And for that reason, it simply would just be a non-supernatural resurrection. It is a resurrection, but it's non-supernatural, which can be reduced to what we may call a natural resurrection. Jesus was really dead, and he became alive somehow, based on the evidence. Assuming that we have lots and lots of good evidence, that type of resurrection can be, in principle, established. Now, I've mentioned to you before we meet just now that there was a almost all-day event, debate event between Mike Licona and Bart Ehrman this Saturday, April 9th, right? It started at 9:30, ended at 4:30 with some breaks in between, lunch and all. It was a long debate. And one thing that I arrived at is the fact that I don't think any of the two won the debate, because the debate question was, did Jesus' resurrection really happen? Did the resurrection of Jesus really happen? If you're a pro, you're going to say, yes, it did happen. It did really happen. But if you're against it, then you would say, no, it didn't really happen. So Bart Ehrman at first was saying, well, it could not have happened because of the loss of nature. Pretty much, dead men don't become alive again. They stay dead. And then later on, he qualifies it by saying, well, one can establish the resurrection if we have amazing evidence. He used that term, amazing evidence.
Instead of extraordinary evidence.
Instead of saying extraordinary evidence. Yeah. So on the one hand, he says it cannot be established. And then on the other hand, he says, well, you can if there is any. But in the final analysis, he doesn't really try to show that it did not really happen. That makes sense. So in his case, only shows that we're just agnostic about it. That's the bottom line with Ehrman's position there. On the other hand, Mike Licona, his position is reduced to non-supernatural or a natural resurrection because he says that he's not assuming God or he's putting God aside, right? He's just looking at the evidence. And from what we have, the minimal facts, we are able to, not only in principle, but also in practice, we're able to, at least he claims to have been able to establish the resurrection of Jesus. Now, to me, like I've said, this is actually a natural resurrection, not the biblical resurrection. Because the biblical resurrection is God raised Jesus from the dead. And by the way, that brings me to an important point as biblical Unitarians. The biblical resurrection says that Jesus was raised by God. God raised Jesus from the dead. He didn't really rise by himself. He didn't make himself alive and rise from the dead. So we have to make that distinction. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll let you ask questions here at this point.
Yeah, this is an interesting category you bring up, the whole idea of a non-supernatural resurrection. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes. Yeah, simply because we're putting God aside in the picture. Now, the reason we're doing it this way is because it's a methodological approach. It's called methodological naturalism. It doesn't mean that we're denying God's existence. It doesn't mean we're atheists. Okay, methodologically, as an approach, as a method, we're putting God aside. So it is a non-supernatural resurrection.
Yeah. I would say that methodological naturalism is unnecessary as a tool. I don't think I would grant that as a starting place, because I think the furthest that Mike Licona can get, a minimal facts apologist can get, is to really confuse and befuddle the atheist with the excellent evidence for the historicity of the resurrection. But the atheist does not have the closest the atheist has is an alien with superior technology. That's about as close as the atheist will come to being able to believe God raised Jesus from the dead. I don't think we really want to argue for alien intervention right. Or some sort of technological explanation that is apart from God himself. So I hear what you're saying. It is problematic to just grant the presuppositions. And that's kind of our topic for today, right? Aren't we discussing historiography as the question of what is the absolute inaccessibility to the supernatural? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, this is where this second challenge or objection that I critically analyze, Bart, the absolute inaccessibility to the supernatural. So according to Ehrman, historians, qua historians, can only adjudicate historical claims and cannot adjudicate theological claims like the resurrection of Jesus. Now here I think Ehrman is partly right and partly wrong. He's partly right because the resurrection does have a theological aspect to it, namely God performed the act of bringing a dead man back to life. So therefore, historians, by the nature of their profession, do not have access to God or any supernatural power. Regardless of their religious or non-religious background, in the conventional historiography, historians apply what is called methodological naturalism, an approach that disallows any supernatural explanation in a historian's inquiry of any event claim. Methodological naturalism is not to be confused with metaphysical or ontological naturalism, which makes a bold claim that requires a justification that God does not exist and the natural world is all there is. Now, on the other hand, Ehrman is partly wrong because the resurrection does have a historical aspect to it, namely that Jesus' dead body physically returned back to life, an occurrence that purportedly had taken place within the space-time continuum on this earthly plane. Now, while historians do not have access to the actual event in question, and nobody does, by the way, they do have access to ancient texts and archaeology that may or may not have captured the purported event in question. Nevertheless, in my thesis, I propose that historians ought to abandon the conventional historiography and adopt what I call modified historiography. The conventional historiography limits historians from honestly investigating miraculous claims, while the latter, namely the modified historiography, would open up opportunities to learn more about the nature of reality. This modified fashion allows any supernatural power to be factored in a historian's historical inquiry. If there is enough evidence for the existence of a supernatural power and its involvement with humanity, and if professional historians are open to them, then there should not be any problem with adopting modified historiography. So if adopted, right, if historians adopt this modified historiography, then the door is swung open wide to establishing the resurrection of Jesus as an actual historical event. So I actually read some of the things that I have in my thesis, and let me pause there, Sean.
I remember sitting in class with Paula Fredrickson. I took a class, I don't remember what it was called, but it was based on her From Jesus to Christ book or approach. And I remember she got to the lecture on miracles. She talked about resurrection and miracles, and it was the most uncomfortable I ever saw her because of the overwhelming number of miracles involved with Jesus of Nazareth and her own historian's limitations to talk about anything supernatural at all. It does set up this sort of awkwardness. And I remember thinking, wow, she looks really uncomfortable. I don't know if she actually was. It just seemed that way to me as a student. And then I remember her saying, we can't accept the miracles of Jesus because if we do, then we have to accept the miracles of everyone in all of history. And I just wonder, Aaron, what would your response be to that? That methodologically, we have to exclude all miracles from historiography because if we do, then we have to accept any miraculous claims that anybody makes in the whole history of humanity.
Yeah, why not? We welcome miraculous events. The question is, are there enough evidence to show that such an event, a miraculous event, occurred? That it boils down to that. You know, the good thing is they acknowledge God, they acknowledge His power, you know, His nature. Now the question boils down to evidence. So I'd welcome any miraculous claim, even from the Muslims or Mormons or
what about ancient Greco-Roman biographies? Sometimes they mention omens or miraculous events. You know, for those, you would want to have some sort of evidence other than just somebody's word, right?
Right. Yeah.
So how is the evidence we have for Jesus different than, say, I don't know, Suetonius telling a story about, you know, a flock of birds that went in a direction and that was an indication that they should go to battle. You know what I mean? Like how is the quality of evidence for Christ? Why is that so compelling?
The New Testament records, you know, the Gospels and the Book of Acts and some parts of Paul's writings provide us a good information that gives us a good amount of confidence to believe that the resurrection of Jesus happened, and even some of the miraculous actions he performed. You know, Jesus walking on water, you know, the blind being able to see again, you know, the lame being able to walk. As a matter of fact, even liberal scholars grant that the witnesses saw something that Jesus did. You know, there were wonders Now, whether or not they're miracles, whether or not they're gods performing them, that's another question, because historians can't get into that stuff. But historians, liberal scholars, even acknowledge that, hey, we have enough data here that says there were people who recognize the wonders of Jesus, exorcisms and healings and even nature miracles. In my opinion, we have enough evidence to see that, hey, what we have here is reliable and believable and acceptable. And the believability and acceptability of all is heightened or raised by the fact that God exists, right? He had some prophecies in the Old Testament. And then we look at the religiously charged life of Jesus, then the probability of the resurrection and the rest of the miracles go up.
Yeah. Yeah. And you also have multiple witnesses for so much of this. I mean, not just, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and depending on what your assumptions are coming into them, you might look at them as Mark, Q, M, L, and John.
Yeah.
But regardless of that kind of question, we have multiple witnesses there. We have statements in Paul that go back very early. So, it's not just one guy is my point. It's not just like one guy's like, this happened.
Yeah. It's not like what you mentioned, some ominous occurrence.
Right. It's not just like, I saw this unusual event or impossible thing happened, and like we don't have access to that eyewitness to say, well, were you intoxicated? Did you eat some strange food? Was anyone else there? Like these are the kinds of questions we would not want to ask somebody if they claimed that they saw, a pig fly, right? Which is a miracle because pigs can't fly. So when it comes to this whole subject, a lot of it comes down to defining what a miracle is. And what I think is so awesome about the Christian worldview is that we are able to account for other miracles outside of our own faith.
Yes.
So we have three categories, just off the top of my head. Maybe there's more, but God, we believe God intervenes, God does things, and we call those miracles. Other miracles, we would say, are just bogus. They're claims that don't turn out to be true, or that we just don't have enough evidence on one way or another to make
to adjudicate whether or not they.
And then a third category is demonic, and we
that
do
is so
believe
true too.
we do believe that there is a possibility for miracles to mislead people.
Yeah.
So we are very open from a worldview. Our presuppositions are very open to any evidence for or against any alleged miracle. And I think that positions us much better than the atheist or the agnostic who just says, I can't believe any of that. It positions us better to weigh evidence. Don't you think?
Yeah, you mentioned atheist, agnostic. Already in their minds, they're already presupposing God's non-existence or questionable existence, right? So because of that, they're already biased against miracles. Miracles could be, God performed or some demonic power performing it. So now the other thing I want to point out too, Sean, is that we need to get away from quoting liberal scholars. I know I did that a little bit, but I did that just to point out that even liberal scholars acknowledge it. That's all it is. I'm not trying to say, well, because they said it, therefore it's true. No, I'm just saying even they are acknowledging that some of the things said about Jesus is true. It sort of debunks the idea of, the mythicists and all that crowd there. Now, we do need to get away from trying to appeal to liberal scholarship. We're not at their mercy seat. We need to carve our own investigation. And Lydia McGrew had been able, I'm looking for the books right now, looking around here. Yeah, she has a number of books already put out in the past 2 or 3 years. And I'd recommend these books to everyone. One I have here is Hidden in Plain View. Another one is The Mirror or the Mask. Real thick book. And then I have one here, which is the recent one, the eye of the beholder. This is about the reliability of the Gospel of John. And this is very thick too. And I have a lot of stuff to read there. And I'd encourage everybody to look into her work. And we need to start contributing to this, carving out our own investigation and presentation and case for the reliability of the New Testament in support of the resurrection of Jesus and other things said about Jesus. And move away a little bit from the minimal facts, work towards the maximal facts approach.
Okay. Let's talk about methodological naturalism for a minute.
Okay.
If you were having a conversation with a historian of Ehrman's ilk,
sure,
and you perceived that this person was already aware of the typical Christian minimal facts approach, and you wanted to challenge the historian's presupposition and make a case for what you're calling here modified historiography. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, modified historiography. How would you go about having that conversation?
First of all, I would acknowledge the fact that there is a place for the conventional historiography that historians employ. Conventional historiography entails a method called methodological naturalism. It's just a method, putting aside any supernatural explanation or power. We just look at what we have here, what happened in the past. And by the way, for Bart Ehrman, the past is not similar to history. The past is something much, much bigger. History is what we can recover, okay, and be able to, write about and, capture and write about. Majority of historians don't really agree that God exists, and because of that, they're constrained. It's a methodological constraint. They somehow decided to say, well, let's go ahead and put aside God. Let's just focus, regardless what our belief or non-belief, whether we're Christians, Muslims, Buddhists. Buddhists are actually atheists, but whether we're Jewish, doesn't matter. Atheist, agnostic, we're going to put aside the question about God, right? So we acknowledge that, okay? When we look at the resurrection has to do with our existential status. It claims to be performed by God, right? It claims that through this, God can make us immortal. When we discuss these things, we get into the ultimate nature of reality. So unfortunately, conventional historiography, through the use of methodological naturalism, it has limits. It does not get into the question of ultimate reality. So I would submit that to historians. Hey, because conventional historiography is so limiting, we need to modify it. Aren't we all after the truth about ultimate reality? The resurrection claims to be a historical event that's performed by God. Okay, so why not modify our approach? And why not incorporate God in the picture? Now, whether or not, what kind of God and all that, of course we can debate that. But let's go ahead and start doing that. I'd like to encourage you to start getting into, because aren't we all about truth? Historical truths could be linked to ultimate reality.
And what if they just said to you, well, Aaron, that's not the way history works, and you're trying to do philosophy, and I'm not a philosopher? What would you, how would you reply back?
Well, we have to realize that history has an underlying philosophy in itself too. Mm-hmm. History, or doing history, assumes certain things are in place. It assumes logic. It assumes that, reasoning is a reliable tool. It assumes that the past really happened. It's historical realism. They call that. Philosophically, you have to have that already in place before you even do historiography. It assumes that historians are able to reach back and sort through all the, all the data, archaeology, texts,
Hmm.
testimonies, and things like that. It assumes all of that. That's philosophy. Okay. So if you're saying, well, that's, you're being philosophical, of course I am being philosophical. Yeah. But you're being philosophical too
Yeah.
when you try to do history. Historiography is replete, is full of philosophy. So I'd like to suggest, if we have enough number of historians who are willing to look into
Yeah.
this, why not? Because right now, majority of historians decide, hey, we're going to put aside God. Okay, we're not going to discuss. Okay, what if someday, if we have enough evidence, if there's enough discussion, then we can go ahead and move towards the modified
Yeah.
historiography that I'm proposing. Namely, let's go ahead and start allowing God in the
Yeah. I mean,
picture.
I certainly do appreciate a lot of the gains of modernism and the Enlightenment over against superstition and
Mm,
certainly pre-modernism and its sort of blind uh, either acceptance or rejection of authority. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot in modernism that I appreciate, especially how it relates to science and technology, engineering, and the many benefits that this way of thinking has brought into our world. But I don't think it's adequate to deal with people. And the history of
okay.
people is not really something that the presuppositions of the Enlightenment can handle very well. The
Yeah.
economists and the sociologists, they can develop models on how they think based on incentives and given various initial conditions, how a village or group will react in a situation. But
Yeah.
there's like almost no predictive reliability. And history just seems like one off event after another one off event. And many of them do make sense within their
Right.
context, but then there are other events where you're just like, wow, I didn't see that one coming. And that's just the sort of the nature of it. So I think we have to move beyond modernism and embrace a more open-minded approach to doing history.
Yeah. Yeah.
Typically, when we Christians talk about postmodernism, we're looking down our noses at it, saying, "Oh, this is such a terrible thing." And in many
Yeah.
ways, postmodernism is terrible. But there are some, you're not going to have a movement if it has no validity to it. There's always going to be a kernel of
Right.
truth, a
Right.
kernel of goodness, or a legitimate
Sure.
rebuke
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
an insufficiency in the previous movement. And, modernism applied to, in the 20th century to nation states and militaries landed us in all kinds of killing each other. And, it didn't produce the
Yeah.
paradise that it promised. So I think when it comes to a bit rambling here, sorry, Aaron, but when it comes to
That's fine. That's
doing
fine.
history, I don't think we
Yeah.
can just
That's good.
privilege the modernist worldview that we've inherited from a couple hundred years ago and say, well, this is infallible and we can't question it, and we have to presume naturalism at the outset. I think it's just kind of naive at this point in the game, at this point in the 21st
Yeah.
century, to say, oh, well, this is clearly the best and only way to do history.
Some of that I believe is you have enough influencers, philosophers of history, and even historians themselves who are atheists and agnostic, and their worldview pushes them to keep this conventional historiography of entailing methodological naturalism. So in the back of their mind, that's really what they want. They have that agenda. They're pushing it. You don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
They won't admit it. They would mask themselves with, oh, we just don't want to allow God. God can do whatever He wants. We just don't have enough people believing in God. Therefore, we're going to put Him aside. Well, in that case, okay, let's go ahead and discuss God. You have to realize too that historians, like I've said earlier, they're not all atheists. Probably the majority of them are theists.
Well, what would you say would be your top reasons for that you would present to somebody like that to believe in God?
First, let me gather or rally the support of all theists, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, historian. Let's go ahead and come up with ways to convince our atheist agnostic friends. Now, if they don't want to be a part of it, fine. Let's go ahead and start our own movement, pushing for this modified historiography that I'm proposing. Then I don't know how to even convince an atheist or agnostic historian to even allow, supernaturalism. I don't know how to do that, to be honest. But at least, if I can garner enough support from other theist historians, perhaps, we can start the movement. And I believe that there is a movement like that already happening in the past decade or two. There is this publication, Theory and History. I'm not sure if you've heard of that.
No, I haven't.
You have a number of philosophers of history contributing to that publication, Theory and History. I think that's the name of that academic publication. So there is a movement happening. Have you heard of a guy named Avizar Tucker, who is a philosopher of history? Okay.
No.
Yeah, he's one of those people that, to my recollection, he's for allowing God in the picture, or some kind of supernatural. It doesn't have to be the Christian God or the Muslim God or the Unitarian God, just some kind of power. There is a power out there that's injecting its or his power into our system, and we have to allow that.
You're arguing for an open system.
Right, pretty much.
As opposed to a closed system. Yeah.
Because methodological naturalism assumes a closed system.
Yeah. And that is a very narrow perspective on the way the world actually is. And it's not provable. It's a presupposition. Yep. It says if we can't reproduce it in a test tube or measure it with scientific equipment, then we're just going to exclude it from investigation. And you can't prove naturalism using naturalism. It's a presupposition. And so the question is it a valid presupposition or an invalid presupposition? And for that, we, as you pointed out, we have to turn to philosophy. We have to ask the questions about God's existence, or however you want to word that. We have really compelling evidence from the cosmological argument, cause and effect. If the universe had a beginning, it needs a cause of its beginning. I think we have good, strong, inferential evidence from intelligent design, especially if we look at DNA. And we say, well, DNA is a code, it's a language. All languages come from a mind. Well,
the anthropic principle underlying.
Can languages generate themselves? Does that make how would that even possibly work for a language to generate itself?
But also from assuming that evolution is true. Okay, I don't really grant it, but assuming that that's true, how is it possible non-life begat life?
Right.
How is it possible that non-rationality beget rationality?
Yeah.
There has to be an intelligent, independent mind that made that happen, made those things happen.
Yeah. Then we've got the fine-tuning of the constants in the physical universe for life. We also have many first-hand claims to miraculous events.
Yeah.
And that's not so easily dismissed.
Yes.
It's quite a burden, in fact. There are, I don't remember what the statistic was, but 60% or something of Americans claim to have seen a miracle in their lives.
Yeah.
If you go to, and this is a fairly it depends on where you live. I live in the heartland of secularism within America. But there are other countries that are much more religious than America. and that would have much higher percentages.
Africa and Asia.
Yeah,
You have
yeah.
a lot more
And so-
religious people there too.
Yeah, so on a Christian worldview, we don't have a problem with, say, like an African witch doctor claiming a miracle and having like lots of eyewitnesses. We don't have a
Yeah.
problem with that. We can say, well, either it's God or it's demonic or
Yeah.
it's a trick. It's a superstitious trick. We can do that. The atheist only has one move. It's a trick. It can't be legitimate. It can't
Right.
really be what it, on its surface, prima facie, claims to be.
Yeah.
And they have to do that for every single occurrence of everyone that claims, not only in the world today, but throughout time. I mean, the burden of that is just immense.
Yeah.
And even if just one miracle happens, a verifiable supernatural event happens, it disproves atheism. So I think there's just a lot of compelling reasons to believe in God's existence, not to mention my own personal testimony, your testimony, the testimony of other people like Louis Zamperini. Have you ever heard of him? He was the Olympian during World War II. They made the movie about him called Unbroken. And at the end of that book, not in the movie, but in the book, they talk about how he went forward at a Billy Graham crusade in California.
Yeah.
And he had been tortured with post-traumatic stress disorder. Not that they called it that back in the 1940s and 50s. I think they called it shell shock back then. But he had these nightmares over and over and over, and he was just heavily sedating himself with alcohol and just really destroying his life. And he had this unusual experience in this tent meeting with Billy Graham where he went forward and got prayed for, and in a moment he was completely healed of the torment of these flashbacks, and he lived another 50 years afterwards. They never came back. He lived well into, I don't know if his 80s or 90s, dedicated his life to serving God and working with troubled youth. You have stories like that, and it's well, what do you do with them? Are we going to say there's purely psychological explanation?
Or even scientific. Some atheists would want to say that, there are some things that we have yet to discover, and that cannot be explained by current modern medicine or
that's we call
science.
that a science of the gaps theory.
Yes. Yeah. Science of the gaps. Yep. Or naturalism of the gaps.
Yeah.
So
we'll figure that out later.
Yeah.
Give us another
in the
1,000
meantime,
years.
We'll that's just you being closed-minded, and you just stubborn to be open to the possibility. You don't even allow the possibility that it could have been God. Oh no, I allow the possibility. No, you don't. You don't really allow it, to be honest. In your heart of hearts, because if you are, then you won't make any of these excuses.
Yeah. Do you remember the New Atheist movement?
Yeah, Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens.
And
there's another
Dennett.
guy, William
Daniel
Dennett.
Yeah.
Daniel Dennett. Yeah,
the Four Horsemen. Well, and Shermer almost got up in there, but he kind of got left out from
Michael
the celebrity.
Shermer?
Yeah, from the celebrity status.
Yeah.
But I remember, boy, when was the heyday of that movement? 20 years ago or so. They were really ramping up, and they were buying ads.
A lot of Christians were losing their faith, and
Christians were like, "Oh my gosh, it's the end of the world," and they were buying these ads on the double-decker buses in England and London, and they're like, "Well, there's no God. Be good for goodness sake," or whatever, and everyone was just convinced that this was the greatest threat to face Christianity, and as it turns out, I believe, and I think a lot of sociologists will back me up on this, that the New Atheists were in fact the death throes of modernism, and that they were just sort of like the last, convulsions of a body that's just about to die and has just a little bit left in it of energy. And, these, you don't hear much about any of these guys anymore. I mean, yeah, sure, Sam Harris is still out there writing books against Christianity, and Richard Dawkins.
But he's not promoting atheism anymore. He's doing something else.
No, who's big now? It's Jordan Peterson and these other thinkers that are just like, you know what? Maybe there is a God.
Right.
And they don't have that hard edge to them like the New Atheists used to have.
And even a lot of atheist philosophers, I mean, who know what they're doing, who know what they're talking about, are embarrassed by the arguments advanced by these four horsemen. They distance themselves from these people when it's
Yeah.
embarrassing. And when Richard Dawkins and company came out, they never really impressed me. And some of the things that they were putting out were shallow.
Mhm.
Let me say something here. I want to be careful. I know there are some people here who were Ravi Zacharias fan. To me, when I first heard Ravi in my, when I first got into apologetics some 15 years ago, 20 years ago, he never impressed me. And I kind of put him in the level of Richard Dawkins. He's got all these slogans
Yeah.
about God. Okay, yeah,
He was a good public speaker.
yeah.
Yeah.
He was Richard Dawkins. He was very popular because he was very persuasive, and
Mhm.
he put things in simple terms. And oh yeah, everybody's all, oh yeah, he's all that. Similar to Ravi. He's with that Indian accent he had, and he never debated. You know that, right?
No, I never really followed his
Ravi never really debated. He just had a
work.
one-on-one debate on stage with some students, like 2 or 3 minutes. That was it. There was no 2 hours, 3 hours. No, nothing like that.
Mhm.
I think he would have been destroyed. You know. Yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
slogans sound really great when you're making a speech, but in a
Yeah.
debate, you have to think on your feet, and you really are challenged with the counter idea. So
Yeah.
it is a totally different kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Ravi probably did some good in the world, but considering the fact that he was, adulterous and committing adultery, and
Yeah.
I think also he was found to be embezzling funds from the organization.
Right. Right.
I don't think he serves as a very good example to any of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
So I,
tragic.
I only
That's
mentioned
tragic.
him
But I do
just
hear
to
what you're
say,
saying. Yeah, yeah,
right.
that
Yeah.
he's kind of at that level, kind of like the junior squad, not the senior team, the varsity
Yeah.
team. But my point about the New Atheists is that it was like a big tidal wave, and many of us in ministry at the time were so nervous about it. And now that tidal wave has washed over us, it has
Mm.
come ashore, and now is pulling back into the ocean. And what we're seeing now is people coming back into churches who
Yeah.
are now
Yeah.
disillusioned with Sam Harris. And they're thinking, I thought he had all the answers. I thought he was so smart. But now I'm just not so sure anymore. I'm not so confident that my fundamentalist atheism is
Atheism.
the only true religion.
Right. Right. Right.
And so that's a fascinating time we're in.
When you ask them, when you press them for answers, they're not really atheists. They're agnostics.
Yeah.
So you hear some of these atheists are claiming to be atheist agnostic. Atheism is simply a lack of belief in God. It's not a worldview dependent. We don't have a worldview about God.
Mhm.
It's just like, we just don't believe in unicorns. We lack belief in unicorns. So they try to excuse themselves from making arguments for the non-existence of God. So they're saying, well, I'm an atheist, not because I have to disprove God's existence. It's because there's not enough evidence. That's what they say. There is a growing movement to that end.
Yeah.
You hear Matt Dillahunty and a bunch of other atheists are saying that to try to say that, well, it's not my burden to show that God doesn't exist. It's your burden to show that God doesn't exist. But the classical meaning of atheism is belief in non-existence of God,
Right.
which is a positive claim.
Right.
You positively believe that God doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we're just kind of winding down here, Aaron. What else on this historicity of the resurrection and these different claims? Maybe we could summarize a little bit. Well, let me ask you first. Did you want to say anything else about this accessibility subject?
Yeah, given methodological naturalism, okay, as a method, the only way that we can prove or show that Jesus became alive again is if we allow God in the picture, because the evidence is not enough, and therefore we have to allow God in the picture. But the problem, he says, well, God is not allowed in the picture because of the methodological constraints. So I'm proposing, well, in that case, let's go ahead and modify our approach. I call it modified historiography. I believe, must move towards that because we're after truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could it be? And I believe that historical truths are on par with ultimate realities. When we say, well, the resurrection didn't happen, there's not enough evidence, and we can't allow God. Well, could it be that you're preventing God in the picture and you're disallowing people to know the truth about ultimate reality? Ultimate reality includes historical realities, historical truths. Therefore, you're limiting research. You're not really about progress. Contrary to what you claim, you're not really open-minded. Hence, I'm proposing this modified historiography.
Yeah.
Is that going to happen anytime soon? Maybe not, because
I think it will.
well, anytime soon. Maybe it will. Maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, it's just my gut, my intuition. But yeah, I definitely see this happening within our lifetimes in the academy. Because, I mean,
I hope so. I pray so.
The other way of doing things is just, from where we sit now, it just looks so like 19th century. You know what I mean? And like, why do I feel that way? Why do so many others feel that way? Well, the culture has shifted.
Okay.
There are going to be some people that are, what we've seen, for example, with Jordan Peterson is the salvaging of the mythical approach, of the liberal New Testament scholars of yesteryear, where they're just like, oh, well, no, the Bible's good. We just have to realize it's just a bunch of myths that have moral lessons to teach us.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we're kind of moving backwards a little bit. I don't think this hard and fast methodological naturalism is going to hold much longer. I mean, I don't really know, but that's my gut.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Another thing in closing I'd like to say is emphasize the fact that we do need to carve our own investigation of the New Testament data, the historical facts, me recommending Lydia McGrew's writings, and I'm sure there are other writings out there to that end. We have to do our homework. We can't just be passive about it. And another thing, yes, we are biblical Unitarians. I believe that one way to reach out to the Trinitarians is not to constantly debate about the Trinity or the deity of Jesus. We have to become allies towards advancing the resurrection of Jesus, advancing morality. Let's be allies on some things, rather than constantly debating them about the nature of God as whether he's a Trinity or not, or yes, there is a place for that, but let's become friends and let's, if that makes sense, that'd be my closing there, Sean.
Yeah. I appreciate that sentiment there. A lot of times, whether or not we can be friends with Trinitarians is really up to the Trinitarian, much less up to our side. But I think it is very helpful to engage and to not just do negative work, but also do positive work. And I really appreciate you mentioning that. We don't want to have our churches be the kinds of places where all you hear is what we're not.
Right.
And I don't think it's really like that in churches, in fellowships, house churches. But it is like that online. Right. Because that is our advocacy a lot of times is that we're trying to win converts, persuade people, and also justify our existence when we are constantly discriminated against. I mean, it's really a lot. Yeah. So my heart would be that when it comes to actual local communities of biblical Unitarians, that they would be holistic and not just stuck on this one subject, just like you said.
Yeah. And incidentally, there is a debate review of the recent debate between Licona and Ehrman
Okay.
by four gentlemen, two atheists and two Christians. And
Mhm.
these Christians are Trinitarian, right? They're very popular. David Wood and a gentleman named, I forget the name, he is with the Inspiring Philosophy.
Okay.
The other two, the atheist is with Myth Vision named Derek. And the
Mhm.
other guy is an ex-Muslim who's now an atheist. I think he is an apostate prophet or something like that, right?
Oh, wow.
So anyway, they together did a review of the debate.
Yeah.
It was a friendly discussion, but you will never hear Trinitarians trying to collaborate with Unitarian. When it comes to Unitarian, oh no, we can't. But when it comes to atheists, it's different.
Yeah.
They hug atheists, with all their might, but they shy away like plagues from Unitarians. And
Well, I can't say that I know how to fix that, but I do kind of understand it. I think there is just an incredible fear. An evangelical knows what to do with a liberal Christian.
yes,
And ironically, most liberal Christians believe in the Trinity and delight in the mystery of it. But if you are, say, like a Unitarian Universalist liberal Christian, then an evangelical knows what to do with you. They say, well, you are part really of a different religion, or some of these more liberal mainline denominations. They're like, you guys, we put you in a box over here. You don't accept the authority of Scripture, so therefore you're in a different category. The real fear and confusion and, I believe, animosity towards us comes in because we're saying to them, no, we agree with you about Scripture.
on everything except.
And it's because we agree with you on Scripture that we disbelieve in the Trinity, because we don't find it in Scripture. And as a model, as an explanatory model of God's inner being, we don't think it works with Scripture or reason or history. All three fail, fail, fail.
Mm-hmm.
And we are genuine followers of Jesus who accept the same Bible as you. That is terrifying. We're the contrary witness in the room that is raising her hand and saying, yeah, I saw this person kill the other person. Like, I was there, I saw it. They have to get rid of us. So I think I kind of understand why there is such a bulldogishness against us. But you know what? From the example of Jesus, I don't see that as justification for us being that way back.
Right.
I think that we are taught to love our enemies, and to pray for them, and that if we do get slandered because of standing for the real Jesus, that he says to leap for joy, because that's the way they treated the prophets. Jesus' persecution didn't come from the Romans very much. I mean, at the end, of course, but most of it was from the established religious leaders who believed in the same Bible as he did.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're at today. But I really appreciate your time, Aaron. Thanks so much for presenting this research, and we'll be certain to have it available to people to read the entire paper. What's next for you? Do you have any idea about future projects that you're working on, or anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, I'd like to continue to work on fine-tuning the content of my thesis, and some things I'm changing. And after the changes, I'll send you the PDF file so you can upload it for others be able to view it. In my YouTube, I'm slowly putting together a project, what I call grounding, building, and developing one's religious epistemology. So, we have foundationalism. What do we assume? Logic, reason, the existence of other minds, and then from there we get into the type of apologetics. Are we classical apologetics or presuppositionalists or evidentialists? Well, I am trained as a classical apologist, from my seminary. That is to say, when we defend Christianity, we are using what's called a two-step apologetics. One, we got to establish God first. God has to be there first. Because number one, he's the foundation. He's the ground of being, right?
Yeah, that's a message that's coming through clearly. That is very important to you, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then we get into Christianity, the resurrection of Jesus, his ministry, his second coming. And I believe that the best way to do apologetics is by applying classical apologetics. So I'm building, I'm grounding it and then building it and the process and then developing it later on. Hopefully I'll be able to invite Dale Tuggy. I've already invited, Dustin Smith and, as far as the Bible and, invite other speakers. I might invite Trinitarians too, so don't be offended, listeners, because they can contribute to the grounding. They don't need to be Unitarians to be able to contribute to the grounding. The Christian apologetics, the classical Christian apologetics.
I mean, when it comes to epistemology, you've got a lot in common there.
Right.
And this is a subject that's worth consideration, and it's important, both for apologetics and also grounding our own confidence.
Yes.
These are not cleverly devised tales passed down generation by generation, but that if you go all the way down, there's solid ground somewhere, and then you can build back up using first principles. I think that's a great project, and I'd love to see a book or something, over time, if you could.
By the way,
develop.
I'll invite you too. When eventually we're going to get into, the nature of sin, the nature of man.
Yeah,
that'd be good.
I've been doing work on that a little bit, and I've enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Aaron, for talking with me today. I appreciate it.
All right, Sean. I enjoyed it very, very much. God bless.
God bless. Well, that brings this interview to a close. What'd you think? Come on over to restitutio.org and find episode 446, Resurrection Objection 3, Supernatural and Inaccessible, and leave your feedback there. We'd love to hear what you have to say about this episode and about Shelenberger's approach to dialoguing with unbelievers and skeptics and atheists and agnostics to build some sort of bridge from a historical case, without assuming the Bible's already true, making a historical case for the resurrection of Jesus. And one of the things that came through so clearly in these interviews is Shelenberger's insistence that a historical case for the resurrection of Jesus really properly needs a logical or evidential case for the existence of God. Otherwise, you just end up with a historical conundrum that is at odds with natural explanations without a God to turn to say, oh, well, since we know that God exists, it's just obvious that God raised Jesus from the dead. But without a God, you don't have that move to make, and that seems to be where a lot of these debates get stuck. So if you're curious and would like to learn how to more effectively build a case for God's existence, check out episode 390. It's our Why Christianity Part 3 class called God is Real. And in that episode, I go through a number of the standard, and it's just very brief, a number of the standard arguments for God's existence, including the Kalam cosmological argument based on the beginning of the universe, the fine-tuning argument based on the design inference, an argument from DNA being a code, that all codes or languages come from minds. They don't arise in nature. Instead, what arises from nature is in the information world called noise, not language. And the argument from moral absolutes, the argument from miracles, which you've already just touched on, and then last of all, the argument from personal experience. So there's 6 arguments for God's existence, all of which I think are very convincing, to be honest. And then if you want to go even deeper, check out podcasts 53 and 54, which is my old apologetics class from the Atlanta Bible College, where I go into, does God exist? And then 4 more reasons why God exists. And that's much more of a classical approach, a little bit more of a college level, where I go through the ontological argument, the teleological argument, the cosmological argument in their classical formulations, as well as some of these others where I go into a little bit more detail. And then, of course, there are tons of books in the apologetics world that can help you establish God's existence with someone. But one of the points I'm picking up from Shelenberger here is that using the case for the resurrection of Jesus to prove God's existence is really kind of difficult because you end up with a historical riddle rather than a smoking gun, if you will. You just kind of get fixated on why in the world did these people experience these resurrection appearances, and you start looking for psychological explanations. Or you would start attacking the sources and say, oh, all these sources are unreliable. Or you are going to find some out-of-the-box natural solution, like the idea that Jesus had a twin brother that was secret, and then only manifested after Jesus was killed, or whatever. The point is, the naturalist historian is free to concoct whatever kind of unlikely explanation he or she wishes over God, because God is ruled out of court based on other reasons. So really looking at these other reasons is really significant when talking about this subject. Even so, I think it is really encouraging for us as Christians to know that we can build a historical case, even using the methodology of the skeptic, in order to point very strongly to the likelihood of the resurrection of Jesus, that it's not just some sort of belief based on a holy book, but it is actually grounded in robust historical methodology from multiple sources. And really, if anything, it's difficult for the non-believer, the evidence, rather than difficult for the believer, which I think should encourage you, should bolster your faith, give you some confidence, a spring in your step when you navigate this world that is full of secularism and scientism and constant attacks on those of us who believe God indeed has spoken and has revealed himself through the Bible. All right, well, I've prattled on long enough here, but thanks everyone for tuning in and listening to the end here. If you'd like to support Restitutio, you can do that at our website. We've got a little donation page there, and so appreciative of those of you who are supporting this ministry. I'm hard at work on my paper for the UCA conference, and this year I think you probably heard that there's a call for papers for anyone who has something that they think would be good to present at the conference, who's able to write at an academic level. And so more information on that, UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. But I myself am writing a paper, doing a lot of research, and looking to send that in within a month, since the deadline is July 1st for that. And so I'm in the thick of it. I'm knee-deep, and I'd love to tell you more about it, but here's the deal. I can't. It's too much of a liability. And that is because if you know what I'm writing my paper on, chances are the at least one or more of the people on the paper review committee may also find out what I'm writing my paper on, and the process needs to be anonymous. So if I blather on about my exciting research and all of my troubles and triumphs, then the review committee will actually know who wrote that particular paper, because the chances of somebody else writing a paper on the same subject as mine is extraordinarily low, because it is rather an obscure topic, but I think a very important topic, and whether it gets accepted or not for the UCA conference, I am very much looking forward to sharing it with you, and I think it will, in fact, bolster your faith in our one God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, and be able to really answer one of the big objections that those who hold to the Trinity sometimes bring up. So that's all I can say about that, but just want to let you know that is in the works, and I'm really excited about it. But anyhow, we'll catch you next week, and remember, the truth has nothing to fear.